Hi, I'm Tess Schultz with Tulip Square, and today I'm going to show you how to make this Scrappy quilt block. Now, some of you might remember when we made this quilt block. If you don't remember, I'll link it in the description below. But while reading the comments for this block, some of you had some excellent ideas, such as Yvette Borden had mentioned making this with a crumb block instead of with the stripes, and then Karen Burkhead said, wouldn't it make a cute pinwheel block? So I thought I'd take both of your ideas and show you folks what that might look like. So here is our pinwheel crumb Scrappy quilt block. So you don't really need a lot of measurements for this one, just a whole bunch of scraps and a couple 7-inch squares, and we're off to the sewing machine. Let's go. Okay, for this pattern we need scraps, lots of scraps, and you can totally just grab random pieces and start sewing them together. The point is to make 2 7-inch scrappy squares, and then in addition to that you will need 2 7-inch fairly neutral squares, 2 the same. When I start with, I just sew a bunch of pairs together and then I'll chop them up and do different things with them. So now I have a bunch of scrappy pairs, and I'm just going to start sewing other pieces onto them. Not straight, so I'm going to take this one and put it here and sew it right along there. Got a big triangle there, let's put that right there. Going to move that down a bit so that I don't end up with a space with not enough seam allowance. So now I'm just having chunks like this with different pieces sewn on there, and I'm just going to cut off extra edges, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I will press that. Same with this one. I'll cut off this piece, and then we'll press that. This one, we're going to cut off all of this and press that. Okay. Now we have a whole bunch of colorful chunks like this. And we're just going to start assembling that into a 7-inch block. So let's say I want this there. So I'm going to put that there and sew it. Then I'll chop that off and carry on. And I'll give that a quick press and then sew something on here, there, or wherever. See, here's our example of where you want to make sure not to leave that gap there. So put your next piece of fabric down in such a way that the seam will catch all of that and not leave that empty space. So when you're doing something like this, I find it handy to keep your 7-inch square somewhere so that you can see, which way you have to go. So now I'll plan to put a piece here, and then I'll put another piece here until this is completely covered, and then you can trim it. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can make scrappy squares like this. You don't have to use my method. You could just sew together some wonky strips and then sew the strips together. Another way to make a scrappy block is to take a middle piece and then you kind of do a wonky log cabin around it, and just keep adding pieces and going around and around like that. Obviously you would sew and flip each one as you go, but that's another way to make it. If you ever watched our video of us making pillows, I used that method. And if you get to a point where you have a corner and you're like, this doesn't make sense, how am I going to sew anything to that? Just sew something along here like that, and then you come back and then you have a straight line again. And if this isn't long enough, that's all right, you'll sew another piece on here. There's no rules really, it's just to be mindful of gaps like that. And then at some point you might just want to make a line that goes like this, so you'll just sew these 2 pieces together like this to make a long stripe. Then you can sew that stripe on there like that. As you get closer to done, I like to trim it off close to the shape of my square. I can check and see where I have left, and then you might notice things like this where I left this little edge here, so you don't want that, so you want to make sure you close that off, seal up that edge there. You don't want any loose edges like this. Everything has to be tucked in. And same with this one. We'll see where we're at. Got all of these sides done. As it turns out, I don't even need this piece of fabric, so I'm going to trim this to a squarish shape so that I can see what I have left to do. So here's another example. The space I need to fill up is the gray there, but I can't just sew a piece there. I need a strip that goes across. So to finish off this one, I just made this wonky stripe. I want to be mindful of this gap right here. Just want to lay our ruler down and double check. That will cover that gap. Just going to draw that line so I know where to sew. Okay, now we have one, and then here's the other. I'm just going to loosely trim that one as well. We're going to clean up those trims in a minute, you'll see. The next thing you're going to do is take your two 7-inch squares and draw a diagonal line down the middle of each one. Now, we'll take each one of these and line it up in the center, just so that all of your edges are covered. Make sure there's no, see, that's covered there. Make sure if you flip it over you can't see any of the neutral fabric through the other side. This one I left a little bigger. You can totally do that too. Now what you're going to do is sew 2 lines, each one 1/4 inch away from that center line that you drew. Right now that they're all sewn together, I like to give it a good press right now, and then I will take it to my rotary cutter and trim these edges to match the 7-inch squares. Once you have them all trimmed, like so, then you'll cut down the middle right between those 2 seams. I used my rotary cutter to cut them this time just because there's so many different seams to go through. And now I'm going to press these, and then we'll assemble our block. Now we have 4 of these, and we're just going to assemble our pinwheel. At this point you could do all kinds of things with it. You could make a block like this, and that when you put it together in a quilt could look like that. Lots and lots of options, but today we're going to do a pinwheel with it. So first we're just going to flip this one over and sew there, and flip this one and sew there. I'm going to press these both toward the solid side, and then we will do our last seam. All we have to do now is line up that middle seam and sew that together. I'm going to press that final seam, and there you have it. Scrappy Crumb Pinwheel Quilt Block. And even though there's not really very many measurements, we still give you a PDF so you can have an idea of how it might look in different arrangements, and I can't not give you a PDF, so so there's one in the description, and there's also a link to the previous Scrappy quilt block as well. So if you like this, make sure you hit that little like button and share it with all your friends, And check out our website at tulipsquare.com where you can find all of our blocks and our patterns and everything else. And don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time with a new video. Till then, happy sewing!